Hi, my name is Rachel and today we're doing another Do I Even Like Indie Book? The name is a misnomer. It's just like at the beginning of my channel, it seemed like I was shitting on indie books anytime I would talk about them. I do like indie books. I just find it hard to find ones that I actually deeply enjoy. Anyway, today we're here to ask the question, is this book just Jane the Virgin? That's not what we're doing. Listen. I have to use clickbait. It's part of having a channel. I am going to make some comparisons though, because I feel like if you liked Jane the Virgin and you approach this book the way that you approach Jane the Virgin, you'd have a good time with it. First, I have to sing thank you for being a friend to my patrons. Thank you for paying my therapy bills. Lex, SJ, Eric, Zachary, Jill, and Ella. I appreciate y'all. You unfreeze my heart. My God, I can never work in marketing. And to my potato starch Marxists, as always, Allison, Carlin, Ebby, Kate, Katie O, Marcella, Molly, Paige, Reba, Shannon, Sean, Chris, Sarah, Jules, CJ, Aaron, Lauren, Aiden, Greenmouth, Nicole, Elena, Hufflepunk, and Morgan. Thank you for being a friend. I appreciate y'all. If you want to join my Patreon, you can do so at the link down below. You can also commission me on Ko-fi for book reviews of your book or somebody else's, both for beta reading or already published works. Okay, cool. And if you have questions about that, my email is rachelsrachel@gmail.com. You can email me down below. Okay, cool. Frozen Hearts and Death Magic is the first in a duology. First one came out earlier this year, I think in January, and the next one comes out, I believe, in November. Could I have looked that up before starting this video? I could have, but I'm the worst at this. Let me give you the synopsis. Naya was raised in the shadow of her twin brother, the Crown Prince, who has iron magic much more powerful than hers. But Naya has wishes of her own. They awaken when she finds a white fae almost dying in the woods. She only heard of them in stories, the dreaded race that razed cities to the ground, killed her grandparents, almost rid Illyria of humans until they disappeared. Now, almost 20 years later, are they back? Is there another war coming? But the fae she finds is evasive and secretive, and also alluring and fascinating, more beautiful than anyone she's ever seen. And then it happens. Naya kisses him and nothing will be the same again. In another kingdom, Leah, a necromancer princess, has to find a husband in less than 4 days. During the gathering, when royals from all over Illyria meet, her family makes it clear that she can any prince she wants except one, Naya's brother. And it turns out he's the one who makes her heart beat faster. Meanwhile, war looms all over the land. One of the kingdoms is amassing immense power. The white fae might be returning. Amidst it all, Naya and her brothers struggle with newfound magic powers, family secrets, and most of all, their own treacherous hearts. The book is on Kindle Unlimited. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can find it there. Okay, we start out and we see one of our main characters. We do get several POVs, right? There's technically 4. It's hard to say. We get a lot of POVs in this, to be honest, but technically it really centers around like Naya, her brother, and Leah, who ends up falling in love with Naya's brother. Princess and Naya feels like, wow, I really feel pulled to go to the forest in the middle of the night. That seems like a totally reasonable thing to do. Got zero fucking clue why, but let's do it. She goes out, she comes across a dude just passed the fuck out on the ground in the forest, and at first I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of corny. The narration is not my thing. It's corn. It has the juice. So I go to Goodreads, right? And I'm like, I need to mark this as reading. And I'm like, all right, currently reading. And then I saw the description. Ow, I just bit my tongue. And it said it was telenovela inspired. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. That changes things for me. See, while I have from time to time watched US soap operas, like General Hospital is one that I can think of. Telenovelas are similar, but there are differences. Telenovelas are better. And the closest, I'm supposed to be watching this one that Lou told me about, where this girl can turn into a big cat. Anyway, that one is a Brazilian one. Actually, this author is also Brazilian. Anyway, closest I've come to watching that, besides the scenes that Lou has sent me from that one with the big cat girl, the closest I've come would be Jane the Virgin. And I loved Jane the Virgin. I don't love certain things that Gina Rodriguez has done, but I loved Jane the Virgin.
Sé exactamente cómo te sientes. Cuando descubrí que mi más sincero y profundo amor era en realidad mi media hermana, fruto de la doble vida prohibida de mi padre, quedé desolado.
Jane the Virgin had a very specific thing that it was doing in... I'm gonna put this right here, okay? You just sit right there for a second. Jane the Virgin had a very specific thing, a very niche thing that it was doing in US television. No one else was doing it, and I loved it. Besides it being like both funny in its like it's humorous, but its funny parts are mostly centered around the fact that it's very self-aware that it's a telenovela, but it also was able to simultaneously convey stories with like tremendous emotional depth. The other thing that I loved about that show, and I think that a lot of people loved it until the end, but that's, you know, irrelevant. We just pretend that little tiny factoid does not exist. The thing I loved about it was the narrator and the relationship that the narrator had with the audience.
It should be noted that at a mere 10 years old, James' passions include, in no particular order, her family, God, and grilled cheese sandwiches. Aww, if only our story could end there. But this is a telenovela after all. And friends, he knew then and there that he had to be brave too. I don't know what to say. I'm as surprised as you are.
Please don't say that.
I just don't trust you anymore, Jane. And I can't go back.
And it looks like their moment passed too.
HBO part of the package? Cool. I mean, I love a
Don't say it, Jane.
full package.
Come on, I can't show you everything. We're not on HBO. One last thing, friends. Petra too is about to get screwed.
The narrator really made the show set apart from everything else that was on television, because it's like you were watching it alongside a friend season after season. So when I go on Goodreads and I see, oh, this is telenovela inspired, immediately my brain switched from reading this book in my own narration to reading it in the voice and the like attitude of the narrator from Jane the Virgin. And because of this, right like from the jump, like in the middle of chapter 1, I immediately was having a good time. Narration that would otherwise have felt kind of young and simplistic suddenly changed for me to feeling very nostalgic, like I was back with my old friend, the Jane the Virgin narrator. If you haven't watched any telenovelas or something like Jane the Virgin, let me tell you what the author first said about this book on Goodreads, okay? It's inspired by telenovelas. Telenovelas are TV dramas in Brazil and other Latin American countries. They're often compared to soap operas, and there are similarities but many differences as well. Soap operas are low-budget TV programs aimed at mostly a female audience, nothing wrong with that, and can last for years and years. Telenovelas in Brazil, and I believe in Mexico and other Latin American countries, are primetime TV with a budget similar to top TV productions and aimed at everyone. Like soap operas, they are broadcast daily except on Sundays and focus a lot on romance and family, but they don't go on forever. They usually have 160 to 200 episodes and then the story ends no matter how successful it is. That said, if you think about soap opera, that's a pretty good idea of some of the influences for this series. I watched a lot of telenovelas as a child, and for some reason I wanted to bring some of those tropes to this series and crank up the drama. I realized that it was easier to explain what the inspiration was, but I should have realized that not everyone would understand the word telenovela. So I hope that helps you. Sometimes when we go into a book being told or telling ourselves, think of this form of media similar to how you felt about or go into it with the mindset you went in with this form of media. It can help us get more enjoyment out of it because we see things, we find certain things relatable and familiar to something else that we have enjoyed before. So for me, with this narration, I went into it, and when I switched over to thinking of it as a Jane the Virgin type narration and story, even though the narration was similar to Jane the Virgin, the longer I read it, it was not as simplistic as the narration might give off, especially in the beginning. So also similar to Jane the Virgin, where you feel like, you know, you're getting like, oh, it's a soap, but it's not. It also had that ability to convey those tremendously emotionally deep storylines. I had a similar experience with this. The longer I read it, the more I noticed that it not only had things that I already love — necromancy is one of my favorite kinds of magic to see in fantasy — but it also had things that I don't typically see in fantasy, and I was very surprised and excited that the author took the opportunity to do these really original concepts. It was just a great combo for me of like things I already love personally and then originality, and I was just very impressed by that. Okay, so Naya the princess, we start off seeing her. She's the princess of Umbrar. Her father's the king. Her twin brother is the crown prince, and he's gonna, you know, take over eventually when her father dies. And she just sort of feels like lost because she doesn't really know what she's supposed to do with her life other than like, you know, support her brother. She kind of wants to like, you know, have her own adventures and have like her own romance, and her dad's like, stop prioritizing such silly things. They both from their mother's side have Ironbringer magic, so the ability to manipulate iron. And that was the first thing where I was like, rarely do we see such a thing in fantasy. So that was extremely exciting. So she finds this dude passed out in the forest, right? And she's like, oh shit, this man is actually a fae. And 20 years ago, the humans were at war with the fae. Well, she decided she was going to be nice and a little bit stupid and bring him home with her into her home where she lives, into her room. When he wakes up, you know, at first it's like, who are you? No, who are you? And it's not long before the flirting ensues. But it's not exactly insta love. How do I explain this? If you don't mind the spoiler, I will just tell you now. If you do mind the spoiler, fast forward like 15 seconds or like mute me for 20 seconds. This book did one of my favorite tropes, which is we've met before, but you don't remember. So it's not exactly insta love because one of them has met the other before, which was also in one of my other favorite books that I read this year, but I'm not going to tell you which so I don't spoil it for you because it was so good and that was kind of a big deal in the book. Okay, spoiler over. So then she kisses him. She's like, I want you to kiss me. And he does. And then like they're making out, they're hooking up, and then he disappears. He's like, what did you do? And then he like turns into mist and just disappears. A year passes. She has no fucking clue what happened to that guy. And then everyone in like the political sphere of this world shows up at the gathering, which is in the necromancy princess's land. I can't remember the name of it. Oh, Frost Lake. They're in the country of Frost Lake. No, they don't have ice magic. I don't know why it's called Frost Lake. Their king is a necromancer. Their princess is a necromancer. Yes, necromancy is in this. That is my shit. However, there is necromancy, but there is also Deathbringer magic. So again, just going along the lines of like magics that we don't typically see, elemental magic is typically used, and people are starting to finally do shadow magic in books, which is like my top favorite. Necromancy is so underrated. Why don't y'all want to manipulate dead bodies? Oh, maybe I shouldn't sing that. Why don't y'all want to manipulate dead bodies in fantasy books? That's what I mean. They are different. Deathbringing is different than necromancy, which is really cool. Deathbringers have the ability to walk through this place, which is kind of like a purgatory type place, but also not, which is another thing that I really like in books. Both of A.M. Strickland's books have this, which again, how many times have I brought up A.M. Strickland's books, Beyond the Black Door and in the Whispering, no, in the Ravenous Dark. Anyway, the place is called the Hollow, which is sort of like a purgatory, but it connects the realms, but like outside of time and space. Cool shit. I really like that. You assume at this point that you're just gonna get POVs from Naya, and then come to find out you don't. You also get POVs from her brother, who doesn't turn out, and this is actually a theme throughout the book, he doesn't turn out to be like this like one-dimensional, two-dimensional dude in the background. All of these characters, like even the dad, the parents, they end up getting like more layers, like more depth to them, which I was not expecting, and I was so pleasantly surprised by. And they get like unique aspirations and distinct voices. You also get POVs from River, the guy that the fake guy that Naya makes out with, and then he disappeared. And Leah, the princess of Frost Lake, who can do necromancy. Okay, so Fel, Naya's twin brother, is the Fel, and Leah, they definitely have an insta-love relationship. Immediately they see each other and they're like, it's you. Baby, it's you. You get POVs from both of them. It's clearly insta-love. Again, my lack of annoyance for this comes from like me approaching this as a telenovela, as I did with Jane the Virgin. It just reminds me of Jane and Raphael, so I'll allow it. Especially so because Leah has been so sheltered in her life, so incredibly sheltered, and was not taught anything about like romance and sex, except don't have it, don't let a man touch you, he'll ruin you, and she has no idea what that means. Got zero context. And her mom, who teaches her this, later you find out why her mom is like that, so that's also not shallow and has more depth to it, which I was again really pleasantly surprised by. Again, I can't help but like reinforce to you how much I appreciate when side characters end up getting explored and getting this depth so that you understand why people are acting the way that they do, rather than just being like, that's just how they are, which is something I hate. Because a lot of like indie books I've shat on, and even not indie books, even trad pub books, trouble that authors run into is when they make these villains or these like antagonistic characters shallow and you don't understand their motivations. Everyone can seem very black and white. And in this, I felt like there were gray areas for most of the characters, except maybe the actual villains, but I'm hoping that that gets explored in the next book. You get some of the typical things that you think of when you think soap opera, right? So-and-so isn't the real parent of so-and-so. People who were thought to have been cheating really weren't cheating. People who were in love were kept apart by other people's meddling, and they thought that, you know, they hated the other. For me, it's nostalgic, it's fun, it's balanced out by the originality of the magic and the having characters with, you know, grayness and depths. Speaking of which, not only did we have death bringing and necromancy, the iron bringing was really cool. Naya and her twin brother Fel have it, but they also have this underlying, well, Naya has this underlying fire magic, and she's like, where did this come from? Because this doesn't match up to my parentage. And Fel was actually born without hands. But he learned his iron magic and then used iron to create an iron, like pieces of an iron hand, which he manipulates as a hand, which I think was really fucking cool, just like a really original concept. So we have that disability rep in there, which I think was done pretty well, though I can't personally sensitivity read for that. So whenever he like needs his essentially prosthetic, he has access to creating his own prosthetic using his magic. So it's not really magical cure, so I don't think that it's problematic. However, I understand that I cannot sensitivity read for that, so if somebody else does and reads this, let me know in the comments. It was exciting to see though, and it's something that I just don't feel like we see in fantasy books often, so I was appreciative of it. I also really appreciated the strong sibling relationship between Fel and Naya. That's something I really value, and I typically don't see enough of it in fantasy. Siblings who advocate for each other, have this, you know, bond. It's something I really love, and I was excited to see it here. Speaking of the relationships, the frank communication, especially at the end, was quite refreshing. River, the Fae, this guy, and Naya, our, you know, fire magic iron bringing girl who just wants to, like, you know, do shit, but also, you know, values having a romance in her life, which that I just kind of loved. They both have a really hard time being frank with each other because they're not sure if they can trust each other. And eventually towards the end, they have this conversation that I thought was just really well done in like communicating needs and expressing what's not feasible and healthy for a relationship and what's needed for the relationship to move forward. In a world where we have romances depicted like After and Beautiful Disaster and frickin' A Court of Thorns and Roses, I'd really like to see more of the conversations that we saw depicted here. What ensues is that River ends up being at Frost Lake at the gathering of all of the, you know, political leaders, and Naya's like, it's you. Her brother Fel and Leah the princess meet each other, and they're like immediately like, you and me, it's on. But they're torn apart by circumstances. Leah learns about herself and goes from this shy, incredibly sheltered young girl to a young woman with a dark magic that she isn't sure if she should lean into or not, which I did not see coming, and that was a fucking delight. River and Naya try to strike up a relationship while simultaneously both are trying to prevent a war from happening, but neither of them is doing very well at trying to do stuff on their own. You get flashbacks to what happened 20 years ago with the war between the humans and the Fae. Now again, war is coming and everyone thinks that the Fae are involved, but there's more under the surface that is brewing. And it was a fun, original story and a read that I actually quite enjoyed. It could lag in certain parts, and again, the narration feels quite young, so that doesn't add to the story because it's not like a rich narration. However, if you approach it knowing that, if you try to approach it from like a lens of just having fun, or approach it like I did, looking at it like Jane the Virgin, you might have a better time. Again, I realize that this book is one of those instances where not only does it have things that I very specifically already enjoy, as far as magic and depiction of relationships, but it can also be tied back to a piece of media that I already love and enjoyed. So it worked very well for me. But I think that this is something special and unique unique. And I think that there's stuff in this book that audiences of like the new adult fantasy, YA fantasy, like upper YA, like 16 plus, might not know that they are hungry for. Also, there's a dragon. So I hope I sold it to you because I quite liked it and I would love to chat about it with you in the comments. Tell me a piece of media that you loved because it reminded you of a nostalgic piece of other media. I talked about this in my review of The Beautiful Ones by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I loved that book because it very much reminded me, it was reminiscent of 2005's Pride and Prejudice. So I had a very good time with it because it just reminded me of experiencing that again for the first time. So tell me, what's a piece of media that did that for you, that reminded you of another piece of media that you have a deep fondness for? All right, let me know your thoughts and if you have any questions, let me know down below. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.